I am Kieran Rennie, and I'm the Communications Manager here at the Charity for Civil Servants. And it's great that you prioritise your mental health and well-being and joined us today for a day filled of useful resources and informative sessions. And I'm proud to announce our next session, Race and Mental Health, presented by Bianca Jones from Mental Health First Aid England and Empower Develop People Training. She'll be joined by Chris Seth, Louise Sun, and Liana Kareem from the Cross Government Race Network. This will be followed by a live Q&A session, and I do hope you enjoy. See you soon.
Welcome, folks. We're really excited to be a part of the conference with our session looking at how race, racism, and mental health intersect. Over the next 40 minutes, we're going to be covering this topic with our professional insights, as well as adding our lived experience. I'm Bianca Jones. I'm a mental health first aid instructor, and I also run a company called EDP Training, and we specialise in race, equity, and allyship training. I'm excited to be a part of this panel for you folks over the next 40 minutes or so. And we have got some questions and answers coming up. So please do make a note of any questions as we go throughout our session discussion today. Let's start with some introductions. Chris, if you would like to kick us off, and then we'll go to Louise and Liana.
Yes, of course. Thanks, Bianca. And equally, I'm really excited to be here as well. I am a project manager in HM Revenue Customs, but 10% of my time is devoted to mental health and well-being. So I'm currently the well-being lead for my region, on the back of being the mental health network chair more nationally, and as well I'm leading on bereavement and providing a sort of support group for colleagues. I'm Indian, I'm a Londoner, and I've had a barrel load of mental health issues over the years. So I think I've got a rich history and experience that I feel very confident to share. And if I can inspire anyone along the way, then that's absolutely great. So looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Chris. Great to have you here. Louise, and then Liana.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm also really excited to be here today. Mental health is such a kind of fundamental part of our health and well-being. I really like the quote that the World Health Organization uses, there is no health without mental health. My name is Louise Sun. I'm a policy team lead at DEFRA, where I'm also a mental health network committee member, a mental health first aider, and I also co-founded the Civil Service Eating Disorders Support Network, which I'm also a committee member of. I think it's so important to make sure that we can help foster inclusive conversations when talking about mental health, including raising awareness and understanding of experiences from culturally diverse communities. I'm happy to draw in some of my kind of personal reflections as a kind of Chinese immigrant growing up in East Asian communities in Nottingham as well. Great, thanks.
Thanks, Louise. Excellent. And Liana.
Hey, hi. Sorry. Hi, everyone. I'm Liana. I'm one of the business and governance advisor in Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. I'm also serve as an ambassador for National Voice, where I'm leading a campaign for mental health challenges that is faced by care leavers. Me being a care leaver myself, coming from an ethnic minority groups, it's really important for me because so the way I had to deal with mental health when I became a care leaver, with having zero support and just had to constantly survive and give up my dreams. That's why mental health is so important for me, because I feel like as an ethnic minority, it is not dealt with properly in workplaces, as well as being a care leaver, what it means to me. So I really appreciate this call, and yeah, looking forward to the chat.
Thank you, Liana. Okay, folks, what a great lot we have of experience. I'm excited. So one of the main things that I wanted to start us kind of talking about for our audience as well is the link between actually race, racism and mental health in the workplace. Because many people think racism externally rather than actually, well, how does it impact people in the workplace? But how does it show up, first of all? How does it show up in our day-to-day working life? Chris, I'll start with you with how racism can show up in the workplace, and then I'll ask if you folks have anything to add.
It's a really interesting question, and I think within the civil service we have a code in which we must behave and respect at each other. You know, being kind, fair, and human is a commitment within HMRC. So there is a set of rules which govern our behaviours when we walk through the door. So I think the honest answer is we don't always see it. It's not in your face. I think when we have heightened activity in the world, for example, if there is global unrest and wars going on, that might feed into conversations. Those conversations might reveal the divisions between people because people are expressing their views. And I think it's that point at which it becomes a little bit uncomfortable. And so I'm seeing less and less of, I think, traditional racism in the face of people in the workplace. And I think that what I'm probably seeing is more in the way of microaggressions and that sort of subtle division, how people, because of their sort of ethnic makeup, their personal characteristics, are now moving apart. And I can say that with confidence because, you know, I grew up in London in the 70s in East London, where I expect the sort of the population across the ethnic minorities was much smaller than it is today. And so there was much more unity in the 70s, you know, in the way of community than there is now. There's certainly divisions, and that's probably given rise to a sense of people feeling a bit uncomfortable. But within the workplace, less in-your-face racism, and perhaps we're seeing that more being revealed outside.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chris. And absolutely, it's not really the overt racism that we might see in the workplace, the more insidious microaggressions that we hear so much about. Microaggressions. Louise, Leanna, anything to add for how it can show up in the workplace, racism?
Yeah, maybe I think really interesting reflections. I agree a lot with Chris on those points. Some of the points that came to mind was maybe in the form of like recruitment and progression in terms of and also around like maybe kind of making assumptions about somebody's kind of skills or potential seniority or you know can fit as well. But yeah, I think a lot of the reason that you now see in workplaces is are those kind of forms of micro aggressions, which I feel like they have microaggressions and sometimes have a misleading name as well, so they sound like, you know, micro kind of small, like it, you know, might not really have that much of an impact, but that kind of chronic build-up can really affect somebody's mental health. So
excellent. And yeah, rightly so. It's the continuous impact and erosion on psychological health if somebody is constantly in what we call a hostile environment, feeling that, you know, it sets off your stress response and people feel unsafe. Thank you. Leanna, anything to add to how racism can show up in the workplace? Louise spoke about recruitment. Chris spoke about the kind of subtle microaggressions.
I think racism can show up in small ways, like being overlooked, judged differently, and not feeling safe to speak up at work. It's not always loud, and it affects how people feel, grow, and stay safe, really. When people do speak up, it can be in the silence and or challenge unfair treatment. These things can add up and affect how we feel and valued and the support that comes with it. So I think that's how racism shows up. It's not always direct. It can show up pretty much indirectly most of the time.
Thank you. Really good points, folks, about actually the experiences of racism in the workplace. And as Leanna just said, it's not always loud. And I think that's the hard bit. Sometimes there's lack of evidence to be able to report it and to be able to have the strength to report it as well. If you are minoritized and there can be a hierarchy and you might be reporting it to someone who doesn't look like you and the trust might not be there, there's all those barriers to reporting as well. How I see it is also in the representation in leadership. Often the companies that I work with, as we go up, it's less and less racially minoritized people at the top, and that sends a message. It sends a message of what you can be, what you can hope to achieve, what you can aspire to. It sends a very subtle but overt message over time to people in that representation and not seeing yourself. So, folks, if this is some of the ways that it shows up, what is the impact of this on somebody who's in the workplace day to day and they could be experiencing not seeing themselves, these microaggressions, being excluded, being spoken over, their contributions not being acknowledged? What is going to be the impact for that person of colour in the workplace?
If I can go first on that, Bianca. So I guess when I think about racism, it's not just the hostile, aggressive behaviours, it's the discrimination against groups of people too. And one of the things that people say to me is that if they are a first generation immigrant and having been brought up in another country and arrived in the UK, it might be that English isn't their first language. Their achievements, in education and in work were not in the UK, and so they may find that actually they're behind the curve. That trying to compete with people that perhaps do speak or have a better command or a different command of English, and so the race disparity audit that some of us may have seen revealed that a greater proportion of ethnic minorities are in those lower grades, and I think you pointed out that in the higher leadership roles we're seeing fewer people, and part of the explanation is that we may have super qualified, highly talented people in those low grades because their achievements don't quite match the West, wherever they've achieved it, from their country of origin. And so what it does is it has created depression in some people. I've particularly spoken to men over 45 who have told me about giving up on their aspirations and then just settling for different type of work. So I've seen that. Yes, so we've seen lots of people become less of themselves, a shell of themselves as a result of not really reaching their full potential.
Gosh, and I can imagine then the knock-on effect onto self-esteem and self-worth. And we often know as well, from mental health first aid point of view, is that depression and anxiety can often be experienced together in mixed anxiety and depression, which we can see, can't we? If we're feeling low, how then we can start to experience feelings of anxiety as well. And thank you for highlighting as well for men of colour, which is really important demographic for us to think about. And as well on that, for many Black women, there's a higher experience of anxiety. I think 1 in 3 Black women will experience some sort of anxiety disorder and the phenomenon of imposter syndrome as well. Louise, Leanna, anything to add around what is the impact of this on mental health and psychological health?
So I think that that kind of heightened kind of stress response, fight, flight response, I think that can really kind of impact your kind of nervous system and kind of overall health if you're in that kind of heightened state of anxiety. And I guess there's also that extra mental burden around things like decoding ambiguous kind of comments, thinking about whether you should feel feel like a certain kind of comment or incident might have affected you, or if you're just kind of making a fuss, constantly kind of replaying incidents and questioning your perceptions, and then worrying about future encounters as well. That can take up a lot of mental energy that you could be using to take care of your mental health. So I think there's kind of that angle to it as well. And definitely agree with that kind of erosion or undermining of your sense of self-worth, belonging, value in the kind of workplace, and also in terms of potential like kind of social exclusion as well. So that might kind of go both ways. If you feel like you are being excluded, but you may also kind of choose to avoid social situations to prevent those kind of repeated feelings of distress or alienation as well. And when we know that having strong social connections are a really good buffer for stress and maintaining positive mental health. So yeah, I think those probably kind of all add to the mental burden, I would say.
Yeah, poor mental health, mental ill health. And what you mentioned, Louise, there about the mental gymnastics, that invisible load that also not many people might know about. But if you're constantly thinking and overthinking and replaying situations and thinking, how am I going to come across if I say this? How is this room going to read me? That is a lot, and it's draining. And those thoughts can go into a washing machine cycle. And, that's very much the thinking can stem into very much what we call anxiety disorder. Thank you, Louise. Leanna, anything to add that hasn't been mentioned about the impact of racism?
No, I just wanted to say very good points from Chris and Louise. And to add to that, I would say, yeah, racism at work can lead to constant self-doubt, anxiety, and feeling like you're never enough. And when you are doing well, it can make people feel isolated and hyper-aware of how they're perceived. And it can also prevent you from not speaking up next time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Leanna. Okay, folks, so we've got a good idea of how it can impact somebody in their mental health, psychological safety. And we know statistically that marginalised racial people are more likely to experience severe mental health illnesses like schizophrenia, for example, or schizoaffective disorder or psychosis experiences as well. So what can we do at the moment with global events or when global events happen, like we saw with the Black Lives Matter movement and the murder of George Floyd, like we've seen with the riots in 23 and 24 and the protests and the rise of anti-immigration now? What is the impact and the overspill into the workplace with current events that we can't avoid that are currently going on? Who wants to shed some light on the impact of global events?
I don't mind, although I'm mindful that, across the civil service, there's a sort of moratorium of messaging around the sort of official position on this, and except to say that, you know, colleagues do tell me that coming to work, delivering good quality, high performance, which is expected of them, on the back of some, you know, difficult years of hostilities, whatever side of the fence you're sitting on, has been very challenging to be able to, you know, put on that work face and deliver business as usual on the back of what is going on. You know, as an Indian man, whilst I wasn't born here, I was 18 months old when I arrived. I probably sound very conservative, but I've got a very colourful, you know, personality. And so I've worked in the civil service for almost 35 years. I've lived, you know, here for 50 plus years, and I've got daughters in the NHS who were born and brought up here. Yet, you know, the recent unrest and protests from the sort of far right movements, so called, have made me question my belonging. You know, for the best part, I feel a sense of belonging, and a sense of belonging is helping me to reach my full potential. But there are times, particularly more recently, where I've lost that sense of belonging, and you know, I'm being questioned about my legitimacy and presence in the UK, and that makes me feel sad, and it then chips away at that sort of talent. And that's what that unrest has done for me. And I know from colleagues more broadly, you know, who are impacted because they've got families in countries where there is sort of war going on, and seeing, you know, the news every day. It's very difficult to apply themselves to day-to-day life and deliver in the same way.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for sharing with us as well your lived experience there as well. And that's something that I'm hearing a lot, is the feeling of belonging and safety, which is, you know, vital as part of our needs as humans, that we feel secure and safe. And actually, if we don't, it can have real detrimental effects. How are we going to be able to perform at our best if we're not feeling safe to do that because of what's going on globally? And we need to remember as well, part of systemic racism is what's going on globally will then affect people, and that's where the people to people interpersonal racism happens. So if people feel like there's permission to say go back home or where are you from 10 times to somebody, because global events are conditioning them that this is okay, we see a spike then in the interpersonal racism. And this is something that we will have in the workplace. We will have opposing views and opposing belief systems. And that's something that, as this continues, we're going to have to manage a little bit better, because people are, of course, entitled to believe what they believe. But when it comes to harm, we have policies in the workplace where, you know, we can stop that from someone being harmed in the workplace from prejudice and discriminatory views. Louise, Liana, anything to add about global events and how that can affect a person of colour in the workplace?
Yeah, so it's it can feel like quite kind of overwhelming as well, because there's only kind of so much like that you can control personally in these situations. I definitely agree with that sense of that kind of lack of safety and belonging being really kind of heightened by especially like news coverage on global events, which might then change how certain communities are seen or can perceived, and then kind of treated in everyday life, and you know, whether that these changes in terms of, you know, increases in actual like hostile in behavior, you know, even if that's outside of the workplace, if that's impacting like your community, then that can you know, really impact then how you show up and at work that day, as well as that general sense of like increased kind of collective fear in certain communities, and to kind of add to that as well, you don't have to necessarily be the direct victim to be hurt. So seeing or hearing about violence or kind of racist behavior against people who share your kind of identity can cause things like hypervigilance, nightmares, probably a deep sense of kind of sadness. So a bit like don't know if this is the best way to describe it, but like emotional secondhand smoke or something. And I think it's also important to acknowledge generational kind of traumas as well, and how that can pass between generations. So families passing down either like kind of stories or survival behaviors, physiological kind of responses that might have been shaped by discrimination in kind of their lives, which then children can potentially inherit that emotional burden that their parents may have never really healed from, because they didn't have the kind of tools to do so at the time, and that sense of kind of stigma and shame, which hopefully you're trying to kind of tackle in the kind of current times. And then when I guess there's a kind of fresh crisis, it can add the layers of what's kind of happened already, and trigger those kind of feelings of kind of fear, that kind of lack of safety, danger, and also kind of isolation and a kind of lack of belonging as well. So yeah, I think all these moods can be pretty kind of compounded over time too.
Excellent, thanks, Louise. And I think that's a really good point. We think of things like BLM, the anti-migrant kind of protests as separate, but actually it's layering and it's the constant of it as well. And I think what you described really well, Louise, was actually the vicarious trauma of seeing these things and hearing about these things, and continuously as well, and the impact that would have on somebody's sense of belonging, as Chris shared, how safe you feel as well to be yourself and your whole self. Because when we step into the workplace, we don't just, be half a person. And MHF England are very passionate about the My Whole Self campaign, because we are whole people. And I think that's important for workplaces to recognise as well. Liana, anything to add?
Yes, so for many ethnic minorities, we've lived through a lot. For example, the Black Lives Matter movement, the George Floyd, and COVID-19, when East Asians were constantly being attacked, and also the racist riots that shook our communities. For many of us, these weren't just headlines, they were personal. And we were expected to carry on, stay professional, while dealing with trauma, fear, and grief, often in silence. So yeah, in many cases, managers in workplaces didn't acknowledge what we were going through when those events happened. So ask yourself, how did that make us feel? Where was the space to process, to heal, to be seen? And if we are serious about equality and well-being, we need to start by recognizing the emotional impact these sort of events had on us and still have, and those who lived them. So that's all I wanted to add.
Thank you, Liana. Very important as well, because again, we're whole people, and actually some acknowledgement from the workplace about what's going on at the moment, a statement even saying where they stand, holding a space for racially minoritized people to be able to go and sit and speak to others. Yeah, something like that would be really helpful in when these things happen as well, to hold us, because workplaces have a duty of care, they have a responsibility to look after our health and safety, and our mental health is a part of that as well. Okay, Liana, you touched on something. You said about most of us dealing with this in silence. And this is something that I see a lot. There's people that have been harmed, they are being hurt in the workplace. We know that Tuck reported 2 in 5 racially minoritized people would be experiencing racism in the workplace. 2 in 5, and that's not a stat, that's real people like us here on this call. So what is the barriers then for people not to speak up, not to report it, not to log it, not to go to their manager? What's the challenges in the workplace, and also what's the challenges outside of the workplace?
Yeah, so one, we need to first start with how hard it is for us to talk about racism in the workplaces, because it might be easier for some communities to talk about their mental health challenges, but you have to think about us ethnic minorities who come from, there's lots of fear, there's lots of judgment of being misunderstood and mental health issues is not often talked about. So when we are talking about racism, it's got to the point where we can't no longer take it. And also in some culture, mental health issues seen as just not an issue at all and more like a personal weakness. And that makes it even more harder for us to talk about. There's also stigma. People are often told to pray more, to be grateful, just to push through. And while faith can be a strength, it can also make someone feel like, especially ethnic minorities, feel like if you're not praying more and you're dealing with mental issues, you should pray more because it's lack of faith. And most faith tradition, even though it teaches us to basically take care of your mind, take care of your body, and take care of your soul. And so together or collectively, we have to really understand the fact when an ethnic minority person is talking about racism, it comes from a point where we no longer can take it.
Thank you, Liana. Some really good points there about different cultural groups. We've got faith that actually is a protective factor for our mental health. It gives us connection, which is fantastic. But some groups as well not acknowledging mental health as an illness that needs medical help as well. And again, what we can do in our kind of groups to keep advocating and reducing that stigma so that people can go and get the right help that they need as well. Thank you. Chris, then Louise, anything to add to what's the challenges to go in to ask for help?
Yeah, so I do feel that within the UK, we do have access to a lot of good quality support, and there is the opportunity to speak out about this. But I accept that we as individuals can be bound by a range of things, confidence, safety, culture, and so forth. But here I am. I grew up with within a domestic abuse sort of environment. It was linked to alcoholism from one of my parents, and actually calling it out is the right thing to do. If there is widespread alcoholism amongst a community, then yes, call it out. Wherever we see injustices happening to people, it's important that we do call it out. Otherwise, it's allowed to, flourish and continue existing. So that's one thing that we can do. I think individuals should find a way to be able to open up and share some of their traumas, because I think, as Liana has says, and even Louise, about the different layers of complexity, it's not just that because of my ethnicity, I'm sort of challenged because of my educational achievements and my low socioeconomic background, but there are sort of PTSD issues linked to my culture because of domestic abuse, alcoholism, religion, marriage, and so forth. So I think my healing certainly started from within, finding the courage to be able to open up and accept and appreciate the problem, share, find a professional to be able to guide you through to the next step. Those were the essential bits, and I think conversations in the workplace, raising awareness in the workplace, particularly across the manager community, especially if they're not got that direct experience that people have had. That's a really important place to happen as well, so we can have those conversations.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks for sharing with us as well. And it's really important that people can have the courage to speak up, but that's often where the challenge can start from. If you are one of a few in a workplace and you've got to speak to your manager, there's a hierarchy and a power imbalance there, and then your manager may not look like you or understand your cultural norms or some of the cultural factors that may be also impacting the racism or your poor mental health, for example. So yeah, it can be really challenging, can it, to speak up. Louisa, Liana, anything to add?
So to add to that, I would also say maybe that if your self-esteem is incredibly low, and you feel like you might be a threat rather than being a valuable member of society, if you're constantly being asked like where you really from, or questioned about if you're taking a job that could have been that somebody who is from the home country could have had, or I remember during COVID-19 as well, there was a lot of hostility towards the East Asian communities. Then you feel almost like you don't deserve help, you're taking up extra resources and kind of burden. So I think that kind of sense of shame and kind of low self-worth can also add barriers to preventing help, as well as also that sense of like not wanting to make a fuss. I think Leona mentioned maybe encourage just to push through, or not think of it as a big deal. And kind of in relation to that, I remember one quote that I heard was something like, you wouldn't put a plaster over a paper cut just because you didn't break your leg or something. But I think it was the kind of point was to show that with really complex topics like race and mental health, and acknowledging that we all have such unique experiences, it's something that you can't really compare, and whatever you've been through, if you feel like you need support, you absolutely deserve it as well.
Oh, absolutely. We all deserve it. And I think it's really important to remember actually how unique we all are. And it's not a one size fits all, but everyone does deserve help and that confidence to get it, particularly if there's low self-esteem. If you feel like you're under threat in your job, you're going to be less likely to speak up about something that you have a lack of evidence to prove, which is the whole thing of microaggressions. They're insidious. And that's the reason why many people don't report them, because of the lack of evidence, because it's someone's word against someone's word, and it can be really, really complex with everything else that we've spoken about, the layers that somebody would be experiencing. So let's turn our attention to signposting and resourcing, and think about what we would say to somebody who is experiencing racism or discrimination. What would we say to them to get help, maybe externally, or what to do inside the workplace? I know from my own point of view, we've seen since Black Lives Matter movement, which was really a catalyst, we've got lots of support out there that's popping up. I know we've always had BATAN, which is the therapist directory for therapists from the global majority. We've got Black Minds Matter now, again, which is the kind of directory for therapists from the global majority as well. Mental Health First Aid England also has a great resource for how to look after our global majority employees in the workplace. So I encourage people to access that. What about you folks? Chris, any advice and any signposts and resources?
So I guess there's caring for oneself, through the trauma of racism, and that's, you know, thinking about any harm that's happening to you physically, mentally, and then dealing with that first. It could be that, you know, you need to call the emergency services. You might need to speak to the police, and I think if there's any immediate harm, you may need to talk to your doctor or the ambulance service, and so it's really important that you don't overlook the sort of physical harm, the mental harm that you're experiencing in the workplace. You know, each of our civil service departments ought to have a employee assistance program. You know, that's available through your sort of HR guidance and HR policy. Your manager should be able to direct you to that. Subject to the sort of relationship you have with your manager, if it's an open one, you know, your manager should be able to sit down and listen to you, and particularly if you escalate your complaint in a more formal way, then, you know, managers should be able to help direct that through to the right channels. It could be that you've got safe haven reps, an independent person that can perhaps be a safe space for you to just vent and talk openly about what you've experienced. And I guess the last sort of thing that came to my mind is the communities. There's so much value with networks and communities that perhaps you're drawn to because people share the same personal characteristics, or in protected characteristics. These are places where, you know, human beings can validate what you've experienced and inspire you to boost your resilience and actually challenge the unacceptable behaviours that we've faced. So those are some of the places I would recommend.
Thank you, Chris. And connection, community, faith, these are all really good protective factors for well-being. And thank you for reiterating as well. Medical services, so GPs, absolutely can be fantastic, and the professional help in the workplace, employee assistance programs, and of course mental health first aiders in your workplace as well. Louise, Leanna, any other signposting or advice for somebody?
I definitely agree about there being such incredible value in communities. Never underestimate the power of talking to someone who may be going through the kind of same experience, although it might not tackle the root cause. You know, there's so much power in realizing that you're not alone. And I think in most departments there are ethnic minority and kind of race networks, as well as mental health or kind of wellbeing networks. I think most technologies have mental health first aiders, and employee assistance programs. And if you do reach out to a mental health first aider, or contact your department's employee assistance program, you can always ask if you can speak to somebody who is from a community that you identify with, or, you know, speaks the kind of same language as you, and shout out as well to the Civil Service and Race Forum, who've done so much kind of amazing work. Me and Leona actually would really like to kind of set up a specific mental health and wellbeing work stream to continue these kinds of conversations and explore the huge range of topics around mental health and wellbeing from different kind of cultural perspectives. So if you're interested in being part of that, we would love to hear from you. And then in terms of other points that came to mind on this question, maybe it's just accepting that you know, it will feel difficult and maybe a bit uncomfortable at first, because we're not kind of used to having these kind of conversations, but it should kind of get easier over time, and usually our minds usually maybe imagine like the kind of worst case scenario, and actually you know, there can actually be a lot more kind of supports kind of out there than you might think. If it is something that you're kind of nervous about kind of raising, you could always prepare like a kind of short script and think about the setting that would make you feel most comfortable in having that kind of conversation, whether that's like in person, in a certain part of the office that's quieter, or somewhere outside, kind of near the office, kind of things like that as well. And you could always like rehearse it with either a kind of friend at work, or somebody in those kind of communities, in local staff networks, or with a mental health first aider as well.
Thank you, Louise. Leanna, anything to add for signposting anyone for help?
Yes, of course. And I wanted to add a slightly different point before I answer your question. Is that even though when the support is available, it's not always culturally sensitive, people often feel like they have to explain their background before they can talk about what's going on. And that's exhausting because with only around 9.6% of clinical psychologists coming from Black, Asian, and ethnic minority groups, it's clear we need more representation in mental health services. So my advice would be, sometimes the first step is to admitting to yourself that you're okay, and it's okay to speak up for mental health, and creating a safe space, even privately, that can help, whether it's like journaling, drawing, or just sitting quietly. And it's about giving yourself the permission to feel. And sometimes the way it helped for me being a care leaver and dealing with mental health issues is that finding people that also went through the same trauma as me, and that really helped, just trauma dumping on each other. So yeah, and I think, yeah, tell yourself it's okay to talk about mental health issues. It's okay to sit there and say, I want to do this for myself, for my.
Thank you, Leanna.
But yeah, thank you.
Love that point as well about the self-care, something that I'm a big advocate for, and so is Mental Health First Aid England, about what can we do to help ourselves, whether it's the meditation, the mindfulness, going for a walk, journaling, as you said, affirmations, which is something that I absolutely love to do and helps me. What can we do to help ourselves? Because yes, systemically, as we spoke about representation as we go up the food chain, as you like, it's less and less. And if psychologists is at 9% you said?
9.6%.
9.6%, then we can probably assume that also that's going to be across the board with doctors, with therapists, with counsellors as well. So you're unlikely to get someone who looks like you. And therefore, like you said, that explaining yourself. And actually, every time we explain ourselves, we're actually explaining and almost justifying our existence. We're othering ourselves when we're having to explain ourselves. Imagine, actually, we're othering ourselves when we're having to explain ourselves. And again, the impact on mental health and psychological safety. Thank you very much, folks. That was really, really useful, your contributions. And I think anyone out there who's experiencing racism or discrimination in the workplace, do speak up. Nobody should get hurt in the workplace because of the colour of their skin. Any questions we're going to be taking now, so please do pop them in the function and we'll be happy to answer any of your questions. You will be getting a resource document after this as well, so that you can continue your learning journey, and it has got some of the signposting that we've mentioned in it as well. Thank you very much, and thank you folks for your contribution as well. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You're welcome.
Okay.
So Bianca, Laura, Leanna and Chris, hello, and thank you so much for that really powerful and interesting session. That's actually the second time I've listened to it through and feel like I took more stuff from it the second time, really. So I'm going to go straight to the first question. So the first question is, how should a white British colleague best show solidarity and support in general? So I wonder who would like, Bianca, do you want to kick off with that? And then maybe we'll go to the others as well.
Absolutely. Hi, folks. Great to be here. So with that question, first of all, we are all human. So some of the things that you would do with other people, like asking how somebody is, asking twice, showing that you care. I think things not to do is maybe say, I know how you feel, particularly if you are, as mentioned in the comment, a white British colleague, because you're not going to know how that person feels. So I would absolutely veer away from that. And actually, it's best to focus on the feelings that the person is sharing. So if they're saying that they feel exhausted, you can mirror that back to them. You're feeling exhausted. Thank you for sharing with me as well. Can always be really, really helpful. I think just opening up a conversation with somebody so that they can feel like they can talk to you, because if they're feeling minoritized and then possible stress from what's going on as well, they don't want to then feel ostracized in the workplace. So I think having a safe space to be able to talk to somebody would be useful.
Thank you. Who else would like to add to that?
I'll jump in there, Kath. Thank you. Chris Seth here. I'm in HMRC and the Wellbeing Lead. So I think for anybody showing solidarity, it can be incredibly frightening, be quite scary. You have very, very strong views internally, but depending on the environment that you're in, you might feel intimidated. You might feel the risk of being ostracized because you expressed a view that perhaps goes against the grain. And so I recognize that in the first instance, it is very difficult. Within the workplace, I imagine we all have a commitment to be kind, fair, and human to each other, and work as a single community to achieve those shared goals. So actually, we are one community. So on that basis, we have every right to be able to support each other, irrespective of what the sort of underlying issues are. I think we can start off with understanding the issue, perhaps taking a moment to actually raise our own individual awareness of what those issues are, and perhaps what are the challenges for colleagues. If I'm certain there are colleagues out there who wouldn't mind having a conversation about how those issues are affecting them, and that gives a good, rich sort of awareness of what's going on. And then by engaging with communities that represent groups, attending those events, reading information, it's a good place to start showing solidarity.
So almost like the personal and more kind of looking outside and education as well.
Absolutely, yes. And we've seen how, sometimes social media channels don't present verified information, and by accepting at face value what we read, particularly on some social media channels, we're misdirected from the truth. So it's really important that we establish the facts, and we can do that first.
Thank you. Liana and Laura, Liana and Louise, sorry, I'm going to ask you as well. I feel like this is we've got a few questions and there's quite a few of you, but I feel like this is an important question, really. So Louise, is there anything you would like to add about how a white British colleague can best show solidarity and support?
Continuing on the theme of educating yourself, I think that's a good place to start. There are so many resources out there from organisations like Mental Health First Aid England or the Mental Health Foundation on building awareness of the impacts of things like racism on mental health, as well as things like how like microaggressions might show up in the workplace. So I think there are some things that you can do yourself that don't always have to take that long, and then to spread awareness as well through your kind of teams and networks. One thing you always do is invite colleagues from maybe like race or ethnic minority networks, or people from maybe departmental mental health networks, to do a presentation at committee meetings as well, to spread more awareness. Sometimes it's hard to find like one size fits all support for everybody. So if you do know colleagues who might be affected by issues that we've discussed, then asking how can I help? This seems like really a kind of tough situation, and like being kind of guided by the individual as well. That can kind of always help as well, and really showing that kind of active listening, so trying to understand what they might be going through. If you can't there's only so much that you can put yourself in their shoes. Maybe I'll stop there.
Thank you, Louise. And Liana, do you want to add anything to this?
Yes, so I wanted to add a similar point to Louise, really, basically to create safe space for people to share their experiences without trying to explain, justify, or minimize them. Just being present and listening is deeply powerful.
So being open to listening and hearing without making the assumptions about what might be the issues. Yeah, thank you. Question 2, this is actually a very quick one. I assume it's Chris, it's specifically for you. If possible, can you share further details of the race disparity audit report link?
Sure, of course. And I presume it's the link between those sort of intersections between race and mental health. So the race disparity audit revealed some very interesting, issues, which are that there isn't that sort of level playing field, because some people are starting behind the line than others. So when we looked at, for example, how people performed at interview, we noticed that actually there was a greater proportion of people from ethnic minorities not progressing past the initial sift, not progressing to interview and not getting promotion. And that's probably why we have fewer people of color in very senior grades. And so when we look into that in a bit more detail, we find that there are some colleagues that perhaps arrived in the UK as adults, having achieved their educational, having qualified in lots of areas in their country of origin, which didn't naturally apply to the sort of rules here. And it was very difficult, particularly when English wasn't their first language. And so I think that what we could do is perhaps to look at the interview process, ensure it's more inclusive, and perhaps tap into the talent that isn't really getting the opportunity to showcase, be showcased at those higher grades, So and then I think also we've probably removed the BAME sort of indicator, because within the race disparity audit, we use BAME, and that represented Black, Asian, minority, ethnic. And of course, each of those letters opens up a very big sort of population. I'm in the A, but I'm from the sort of South Asian part of A. There's lots of people in A, and actually one single letter doesn't quite do it. So let's continue to kind of produce this data. Let's continue to understand what the data means, and let's continue to kind of tackle some of the obstacles that some people face in being able to deliver and showcase their talent and reach their full potential.
Thank you, Chris. I'm actually going to jump to question 6 now, because this is one I get that a lot of people are asking. I think it's quite a quick one, and let's get this one answered and then we can go back to some of the others. So it's people are asking how they can join the Civil Service Race Network. Who can take that? Louise, we first made contact with you, so that might be yours to answer.
Thanks very much, Kath. Really pleased to hear that there is lots of interest. If you want to sign up to be a member of the Civil Service Race Forum, there is an email address that I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm hoping Liana can shed more light on this. And if you do want to be part of this new Racing and Mental Health work stream, which me and Liana are kind of hoping to set up, then please do kind of say that in your email. There are lots of other really great work streams as well in the as part of the Civil Service Race Forum. But yes, send us as an email and we will be in touch. Liana, sorry, can you remember the email address off the top of your head?
Unfortunately, I can't remember the email address on top of my head either, but we'll share it afterwards.
Is the information maybe in the conference details anyway?
Yes,
So,
we'll try and find it before the end of the event, or maybe send around in some follow-up comms.
So we've only got a couple of minutes. I'm going to try to get through by just focusing maybe on one person. I was going to just come to Bianca for this one, which is question 4, Bianca. I think as you're outside the civil service, it might be easier for you to answer this one. What can we do when organisations do not believe you've experienced racism in the workplace?
Oh, wow. Okay. So as someone who delivers race equity training to many businesses, this is a barrier that often comes up because if you haven't got the lens for it, you're not going to know how it shows up. You're not going to know how it manifests in the workplace, which is the challenge that happens. And also someone else's questions about managers not being able to talk about this or deal with a complaint of discrimination. Actually, managers can often add fuel to the fire by gaslighting, not believing the person, minimizing the person who's just received the discrimination. So training, education, awareness, courses is very important because this is a very difficult topic to talk about. So you definitely need a very skilled facilitator to be able to raise awareness and help people be able to talk about it. Because actually, awareness dissolves discomfort and knowledge gives confidence. So the education and awareness piece is so important. And that's very much where I position myself. But learn, we are, we've got the internet, we've got resource documents that we can send to you as well. I know they're going to share my LinkedIn in the chat for anyone who wants to connect with me and ask any questions as well. But please do mark this Black History Month by making it meaningful and learn as well yourselves.
Thank you, Bianca. I was just thinking we had a session on Monday about psychological safety, and we talked quite a lot in there about how sometimes people are quite scared to say the wrong thing, and so they don't say anything at all. Whereas, of course, actually, as you're talking about, it is about learning, and but it is a difficult thing to talk about in the first place. I mean, there's been some amazing comments in the chat, and we are going to have to finish because the conference is very tight on the time, but there's been some absolutely amazing comments in the chat, more questions that we've been able to get to. But I just really wanted to thank the 4 of you so much, Bianca for facilitating, and then Liana, Louise and Chris, for being willing to come on the session and to share your own experiences and your thoughts about this